Kaizoku Sentai Gokaiger is both a fascinating Sentai season as well as a fascinating journey in its own right. Its unique reputation in and around Toku spaces also creates a series that means a great many things to a great many people. What it all means to me is something we'll fully analyze and break down over the course of multiple videos. First, through the lens of the film released in the same year, Gokaiger Goseiger Super Sentai 199 Hero Great Battle, for reasons that will soon make sense. But it would be downright irresponsible of me to not begin our journey by highlighting what this season is and always will be in part a response to. March 11th, 2011 brought with it the longest 6 minutes in recent Japanese history. The Great East Japan Earthquake, among the handful of other titles it also goes by, was an undersea quake that not only produced the 4th highest magnitude quake on Earth since those records could be kept, but was followed up by tsunamis that continued to ravage a multitude of prefectures in central Japan, and that's just where the impact was greatest. In addition to the damage felt by other areas of the country, many places in the Pacific, including the Philippines, Hawaii, parts of coastal California and Oregon, and as far down as Chile, suffered various degrees of damage. Even Norway, of all places, saw their still waters turn into abnormally towering waves as a direct result of this seismic event. The casualties stood in the tens of thousands, but the emotional toll will forever be incalculable. Graphic and opening as this may be, I feel obligated to start with this, as remembering the forces in play that this particular anniversary season needed to acknowledge, and in so doing, brought back several more cameos than they were originally planning, will always be more important than anything I could critique or analyze about the season itself. What's more, Tokusatsu at its most foundational identity positioned itself as a means of commenting on and reacting to the world around it for the sake of its audiences. A lot of Shotaro Ishinomori's earliest contributions to the genre were a reaction to World War II when he was old enough to comprehend the true impact of what occurred. That mixed in with his frustration around how he felt the topic of the war was being addressed, or rather not addressed, in post-war Japanese literature during his formative years, and you realize it's not some happy accident that the first Sentai Big Bad ever was literally named Black Cross Führer, just to give one example. This isn't meant to create some type of false equivalency for two very different events, just so we're clear about that, but my point is this. Although much of Toku has slipped away from the more direct social commentary it once boasted, Gokaiger found itself perfectly positioned to, at the very least, deliver a small silver lining during a time of severe physical, financial, and emotional fragility. However cheesy, melodramatic, or over-the-top it might get at times, it will always serve as a symbol of that first and foremost. It will always be a reminder to the many children, adults, and everyone in between that watched it that their heroes would always come back. And while the majority of Gokaiger speaks to this idea, as well as many other ideas we'll eventually discuss, I wanted to start specifically with this movie, because on top of being a particularly good film that works with or without a lot of Gokaiger knowledge, it does well to embody a lot of the exceedingly important context surrounding the show, in addition to utilizing story beats specific to Gokaiger's own internal logic. So, on top of laying claim to a sizable number of cameo appearances from Super Sentai alum, this film fittingly features the return of the Black Cross Army and its aforementioned leader. Now, Gokaiger and Goranger are exceptionally different shows, for a number of reasons, but seeing as how this story ties together their individual conflicts to this extent, there are two ideas within this setup that I really liked. The Great Legend War is an event highlighted as early as Scene 1 in Gokaiger, as it is the impetus for forging the Ranger keys Aka Red and subsequently Captain Marvelous would come into possession of. Now, coming from my perspective as a reluctant Megaforce apologist, I've always liked the idea of the legendary battle this is adapted into being this inevitable, unavoidable standing sense of dread for Troy and the team, as opposed to a past event they had to respond to. I like that the context of Megaforce, but specifically the way Troy's character speaks of this impending doom, does well to comment honestly on what a lot of PR just is. That having been said, I appreciate the original context as well, because Gokaiger is also written in a way that interacting with a post-global event Earth makes sense examined through both internal and external lenses. It speaks to this frenetic dance the Gokaiger team does as they balance being irreverent and reverent of their 34 predecessors while housed within a show that seeks to highlight their significance and sacrifices. The Gokaiger want to be devil-may-care pirates, taking what fancies them and never apologizing for it. But they also need to be the 35th Sentai, if only for the sake of those desperate cheering civilians that need a source of hope. This is an idea we'll talk more about when we discuss the season finale and the way it ended up being handled. That might realistically be 2 videos away, so as I sometimes say, put a pin in that. The second idea that I like is Black Cross King coming back to partner with this season's villains in the Zanyak Empire, mainly because there's a lot of interesting parallels to be drawn here. For one thing, both factions are space aliens that are introduced in their respective series as wanting to subjugate Earth. Their literal origins beyond that are rather nebulous, but we never need that information, because both are different takes on the idea of oppressive forces that oppress because they can. And through that goal, both end up forcing their respective Sentai enemies into tragic situations that they need to rise up from. Losing a sibling to an enemy attack nobody could have prepared for in particular is a key thing Luca has in common with Gokaiger. And while this isn't technically known at this point in the timeline, it still defines most of what we see from Luca leading up to Gokaiger's pivotal episode 23. Though admittedly, there's much that could be said for Black Cross King's changed motivation, as well as his changed name. The latter I'm not fond of because it feels like the exact kind of placating his original conception was trying to avoid, but I do like his motivation of just wanting revenge, mainly because I don't think it's meant to be believed. Even Wars Gil, of all people, is cognizant enough to question what's really on his mind. After all, it's a season about pirates and betrayals and trickery. Had he succeeded in his quest, I'd be willing to bet the farm on the Zanyak not being long for this world and having the Gokaiger conflict repeat itself on modern-day Earth, which honestly would have been pretty neat. In terms of plot structure, this film also works as a good jumping off point because it, in many respects, functions like an extended Gokaiger episode. Captain Marvelous and company meet a past Sentai team. Marv gets mad at said team, the Goseigers this time around. Said team wonders why these people are Sentai. They disagree and eventually Aim does what she does best as the resident head of the Human Resources Department. While this movie features an entire team as opposed to just individuals most times, as well as extended sequences of the various members of both teams getting into separate kerfuffles, it's very amusing how many episodes can basically be summed up in this way. But there's a lot more to that as well, which houses one of my favorite ideas in the season. We'll get to that when we talk about Aim for, 3 paragraphs. You know the drill by now. So, within the margins of fighting each other and defending the world, we see another core idea of Gokaiger. Regardless of how rough around the edges Marv, Joe, and Luca tend to be, especially compared to their 2 going on 3 other members at this point, there is an honesty to their temperament and points of view that eventually allow various returning Sentai members to see them beyond their prickly natures, even if none of them are aware of the full scope of their lives. It's an idea that serves as a microcosm of the show, since there is no way to know that at first, and even some of the initial episodes struggle a bit to find their footing in spite of the writing being firmly aware of how some of them come off to others. But it's that much more entertaining with another full Sentai team being a lot more openly antagonistic, though still kinda nice about it, towards them in ways they aren't used to. It's rare that I ever get the chance to talk about how camera work accentuates certain scenes in these types of shows, but I appreciate the simplicity of what they do here. Now, I don't know anything about the Goseiger team proper, so I can't say if their actions here fit into the wider context of who they are and how they work. But I like that the visuals reinforce a sense of equality between the two teams throughout the entirety of proceedings done through both actions and framing. A far cry removed from Bosco's entrance, for example. Even when they're at odds, the Goseigers are basically pulling off several tricks and traps that the Gokaigers themselves either have pulled or could reasonably be expected to pull. What it tells us is that there's this balanced friction among the group that the writing leans into, especially with the more overt Luca and Monet bits that lends an authenticity and impartiality to both of their perspectives. It helps their eventual coming together feel seamless, as if they were always meant to work together and see sides of their counterparts that would have been lost on them initially. It's not just the Gokaigers needing to win over the Goseigers for another power-up, it's Joe being won over by the strength of Agri. It's a film that highlights and emphasizes a sense of togetherness even when the teams don't feel especially together. And that is a pretty natural extension of how the internal team dynamics of the Gokaigers develop. All this to say that, given enough time, the Gokaigers typically find a way to embrace the legacy of what they represent without ever going full guy with it, as one should never go full guy with it, and seeing them accomplish this with a full Sentai team as opposed to the 1 or 2 Sentai alums at a time format, maybe 3 if you luck out with Hurricaneger, we end up with a wonderful means of capturing the spirit of what the show can be on its best day through film. And also, the film is just kind of funny. I genuinely enjoyed the moments of them just embracing the absurdity of their format and going whole hog with it just as much as the quieter moments. But I think what really brings this movie together is how the everyday people go about their business while all the true-to-form Sentai shenanigans are happening. The now powerless Sentai alum are still doing what they can to adjust to a world where they don't have to be the ones to save it in the same way, which is another idea I really like. Something as simple as serving food to children is treated with the same level of dignity as the Deca Rangers still trying to do right by their job, or when Go Pink cameos in the season proper, still literally saving lives. There's something to be said for being able to do the superhero thing and inspire the masses, but the idea of most cameos needing to define themselves beyond their suits at present creates some pretty cool subtext. The work they did was, and still is, very important, but it's also something you're able to let go of en route to the next stage of life. Coming back from time to time is great, but finding stability and fulfillment in the safer world you helped create is even more meaningful as I see it. It's for those reasons that the final scenes really bring this all together in a beautiful way. We got to see the past Sentai helping people without having access to any of their powers except the internal ones that made them heroes in the first place, all culminating in a final battle where our current team has to fight all the Sentai, but then a bunch of the really old school heroes give them a pep talk, but then Black Cross King has a whole second form like a video game final boss, and then the people of Earth relentlessly cheer on the Gokaiger and Goseiger, then every mech appears. It's bonkers and sentimental in all the best ways. And all of that represents only a fraction of the many, many thoughts my Gokaiger watch has settled me with. Over the course of however long it takes me to write and edit the follow-up videos digging into the actual season, there will be so much more to say. And all you have to do to help me say it is like this video, subscribe, maybe throw it on a supportive comment. Let me know that you're picking up what I'm putting down, cause that makes the process so much more rewarding, and it helps new folks find a video they didn't know they might have wanted. Also worth noting, just to moderate expectations here, is that I haven't seen every Gokaiger movie, so I don't yet know how many of those, beyond of course this one, I would have enough thoughts on to review. But since the 10 Gokaiger movie is fairly recent, and the whole after-story Sentai concept isn't something I've dug into before, that's the one I'm considering the most seriously, assuming the season review goes well and you guys aren't sick and tired of Gokaiger content when it's all said and done. But either way, next time, we'll be discussing the space pirates themselves in probably way too much detail. But until then, thanks for watching.